The pyramid doesn't work. We've already tried it.
It's upside down.
What?
Sir, the pyramid is upside down.
Turn the pyramid upside down.
You can't be serious. That would put butter and fat at the top
Flip
of the...
the damn food pyramid!
Get the president on the phone. Tell him to have some steak with his butter.
If you haven't already known this, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans has just dropped not too long ago. The new guidelines for 2025 to 2030 came out and are being billed as the most significant reset in federal nutrition policy in the nation's history. Now, we're recording this from Canada, so our next door neighbors of the U.S. Looking at these guidelines, and anything happening in the U.S. always impacts us in some way, shape, or form. So what we wanted to do today is go through some points with the guidelines, talk about them, talk about things we like, talk about things we don't like, offer our opinions and our thoughts, have some fun with it. With me today, I have familiar faces, hopefully familiar faces to those of you that are watching and listening. We got Matthew, Laura, and Mike, who are all here to help offer different angles, different thoughts, different insights. So we're gonna take a cruise through here. We got a lot of dietitian brains from our team on this one. Let's have some fun, and it will be fun. We were going through some of this before we started recording, and I'm hoping that it'll be a lot of fun. Who wants to take the first bit and walk us through some of the high-level things for these guidelines?
Yeah, I guess I can kind of jump in here first. As we're going to talk about it. So what's surprising is that we've got the food pyramids back. It's just upside down. Maybe they took a little inspiration from Stranger Things there. But for those who don't know, the old food pyramid had a whole bunch of grains and stuff at the bottom, making up the base of the pyramid. And then above that, you had fruits and vegetables. And then above that was your protein foods like dairy, cheese, and some animal sources there. Lots of animal sources. And you can kind of see in there a little bit of beans and uh, other plant-based sources in there, but that's about it. And now we have the new food pyramid, which is upside down, and and not the base anymore. The top of the pyramid, which is the biggest part, is comprised of a lot of protein, dairy, and healthy fats. And a lot of those things are encouraged up there as animal sources of protein. Plant-based sources of protein don't get a lot of real estate in this new pyramid. And then also at the top on the right hand side, you have some vegetables and fruits, and all that trickles down. And at the very bottom of the new food pyramid, we have whole grains. It is the least emphasized part of the new food pyramid. So lots of things to talk about here, but that's kind of the broad summary of what's happened here. What's old is new again.
Yeah, maybe it's good to mention if not everybody is aware, but the pyramid itself, I feel like that's probably what's been people have been most aware of, but we actually haven't had the pyramid, or I guess America hasn't had the pyramid for quite some time. The model before this new one has been the my plate method. So actually looking at like what foods look like on your plate and how to structure that. So I think that's a decent criticism of this new revolutionary in quotation marks idea that we have that we're flipping the pyramid upside down. We didn't even really have the pyramid before, so uh, good to kind of touch on that. That some of the messaging around this is just, I think, trying to be a tad inflammatory.
Yeah, when I'm looking at the pyramid, we'll get to some of the criticism pieces, but it's related to the pyramid because it's upside down pyramid, but I don't see necessarily any hierarchical amount of real estate taken up in the pyramid that relates to the amount of food you could being consumed, with a couple exceptions. But whereas the previous pyramid, what was on the bottom took up the largest part, the upside down pyramid, we're not necessarily looking at it from like the what's on the top taking up the largest part either, but it's hard to separate that in your mind when you think of, oh, it was a pyramid before, now it's upside down. And so some of that logic doesn't transfer over 100%. It's, yeah, it looks like an upside down pyramid, but we didn't take what was previously there and just flip it wholly, which is confusing because some people will probably think that that's what happened if they're not digging into it enough.
And the reason that a lot of models have moved from things like pyramids or triangles to circles is because it more resembles a plate that people often eat out of, and it just makes for a more intuitive, a more understandable public health tool, which that should be the goal, to make it easy to understand, easy to use, not to make a seemingly just inflammatory or inflammatory type of point about previous guidelines or previous recommendations.
I don't really know a ton of people that eat off of anything triangular.
Could be a new thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
If you just use a pizza slice as your plate, then all is well.
Very
There's the real
true.
facts. Yep. So as much as we're talking about the pyramid and the way that the pyramid looks and how it's different from the previous models, is you can't really have new guidelines without any messaging related to how the guidelines are being put out into the world, which is some of where the interesting conversation also lies. Laura, I think you had some thoughts around how the new guidelines in the new pyramid is being marketed. I guess we can call it marketed. What are your thoughts?
I have so many thoughts. I'm sure we all do. But yeah, I think like if you go on to the Eat Real Food page, then you'll kind of get an idea of what we're talking about here. But it's really looking at um, the messaging, or yeah, like you say, the marketing, which some people may call propaganda as well, maybe accurately, is looking at really emphasizing that this is a totally revolutionary idea. So we're focusing on eating real food, which, like, what I think they're trying to get at there is whole foods, things that aren't ultra processed or highly processed. But they're really acting as if that's a huge change to the previous guidelines. In reality, I don't think it's a change at all. I think that was emphasized in past dietary guidelines for sure. It's emphasized in our Canadian guidelines. So, really, what it's getting at there, it's kind of trying to make it seem like they're doing something crazy revolutionary, as almost a criticism to past um, governments and all of that lovely stuff that we get to chat about. Um, Other things that they're kind of doing to encourage that messaging, you'll kind of scroll through the website. They're invoking a little bit of a fear in like how Americans are unhealthy, looking at chronic disease states, and kind of making that connection or insinuating, maybe very obviously not insinuating, but that the food guide in the past is why America is sick, so to speak, right? Um, so it's really trying to say that this is something crazy different. Um, they use messaging such as "we're ending the war on protein," um, as if that's something that was like a polarizing topic in the past, but like scientific evidence and us as dietitians, we have been emphasizing the importance of protein. Um, Everything in moderation, of course, but yeah, I don't know really what they're talking about there. I think it's just kind of again that inflammatory messaging that's trying to get them to prove their point without providing great evidence or needing to do so behind it. But any other messaging that you guys don't really vibe with on there? Because there's lots for me.
Yeah, on the connection that they're trying to make between past guidelines and chronic disease prevalence today, I think something important to recognize or admit is that although past public health recommendations or guidelines for nutrition and many other things have exist, that doesn't mean that everyone just automatically follows them. It's not like the day that new nutrition guidelines are released by every government in the world, everyone begins following it, and then everything that happens after that is a result of people following it. Public health campaigns are complicated. It's a lot more than just give people this information in a general public a document and then everyone follows it. There's more to health behaviors than that. There's more to health environments than that. It's not as simple as these recommendations exist and then everyone followed them. So this is the result of everyone following them. That never happened. There's no evidence that in the past people follow government nutrition recommendations to a T in the United States or any country, really.
Yeah, I think that's, if I'm being optimistic, which I usually am not, we can at least take that from it, right? Like, I think sometimes um, I've seen other dietitians out there to kind of get a little bit amped up about this, where we're all of a sudden scared that all Americans are going to be eating like crazy amounts of saturated fats and meats and increase their risk for heart disease now that these new guidelines came out. But we don't know that anybody's really going to follow this anyways. So we can have a little bit of a lighthearted discussion about it, and kind of have that fun with making fun of some of the recommendations. But yeah, that's really good to mention that, like, yeah, if we're going to put these guidelines out there, um, at least have that evidence behind it so that we know why we would want to follow any of that. But the reality is a lot of people don't.
And there are also implications for some government programs, things like school lunch programs and stuff like that, where USDA guidelines are more directly relevant. And we can get into that later on in terms of how that impacts kind of like the cost of maybe some of the programming as well as what's provided. But yeah, at a broad population level, this doesn't this alone is unlikely to influence behavior significantly.
So I guess a logical next question that I feel like a lot of people would ask related to this. Why try and reinvent something that has kind of been done before, that is an attempt to try and revolutionize and totally change and shift dietary patterns of Americans? That includes a lot of information that's already available, that may be a step in a direction that is maybe less practical because now we don't have any visual reference to something that we actually use more often, a plate model, which was used previously. So why would they have done this then if there's regressions in many areas? What's the point? Why try and reinvent the wheel when the wheel is very much already being used and not used well in a large scale?
I mean, how political do you want to get? I think there's a lot of influences going on. So we're not really looking at, oh, what does all the science say? Are we like absolutely making sure we find the objective truth here? No, I think that the guidelines were made to kind of support some of the things that they're already pushing as a movement. Like, obviously, RFK Jr. has been talking tons about like food dyes and some of these more like very specific things that I don't think necessarily are like the top of the list for issues in chronic disease prevention. Um, but yeah, it's all to kind of distract from other things that maybe the government doesn't want you to really know about or hear about. Um, that's my impression, at least, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, it also kind of builds on a like us versus them narrative or mentality where we're going to give you the real information, so you eat real food. Like the big businesses don't want you to know this, like that type of stuff, where you're really just trying to make something more political than it needs to be and straying away from some of the scientific evidence that some of those past guidelines would be built on. So there's also that aspect of political divisions and things like that.
I think it's very self serving rather than serving the public.
I think it also comes at a time too when you look at like the different movements in American politics right now. You've got MAGA, and then you've got MAHA, which is Make America Healthy Again. You know, you gotta remember RFK Jr. was running for president at one point until, he wasn't going to get enough votes, and then took a position in President Trump's cabinet as you know, being in charge of health of Americans. And so he's been having a long axe to grind about different health recommendations for a long, long time, outside of nutrition. But it's not surprising that he would also come in here and reinvestigate, and essentially ignore a lot of recommendations that their administration has already come because He wants to claim that it's science based and evidence backed. And yet we see that one prominent dietitian out of the states, Kevin Klatt, has called it the ranchers pyramid. And if you look at their one of their documents, they show that there's likely a lot of different conflicts of interest, and there's a lot of representation by the cattle industry and the dairy industry. And I think Matthew, you've got some more to talk about that a little bit later, but it's kind of something else I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I think it is important to address some of the potential conflicts here. So these conflicts are disclosed in a more lengthier document that no one reads. They're not disclosed on the website of the actual resources that are for public use. These are things that you have to dig for, but it also gives them the ability to say, like, we disclose this. But for those that don't know, those who provided some advising on the report include those with associations to Global Dairy Platform, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Texas Beef Council, American Dairy Science Association, National Dairy Council, National Pork Board, California Dairy Innovation Center, California Dairy Research Foundation, and Dairy Management Inc. So, although these are disclosed interests, again, in a place that no one's reading, where some of these things are coming from are saying that these past recommendations are due to like special interest groups and like the grain industry influencing these guidelines rather than using scientific bases. But here we see many conflicts that go in line with what is recommended here and what is not recommended by both the US government in itself in the past, as well as other governments and other scientific organizations around the world. The recommendations that are in this public report also don't even match the research report that is normally used to make these guidelines. So that is highly questionable in how these conflicts may have influenced these recommendations that don't make sense in terms of the health science research that backs past recommendations versus these.
I find this hilarious because I know when I read the Scientific Foundation for Dietary Guidelines for Americans for this round of guidelines, they legit on the first page mentioned something about us wanting to uh, select individuals that had an absence of conflicts of interest. Yet, let's get a bunch of people helping out with making these guidelines that have clear conflicts of interest. It's this type of a thing. It's just, and again, that part is in the same place that you just mentioned, Matthew, where you got to dig and find this information. Not everybody's going to look there, or even, even if they find it, they're not necessarily going to know the impact that this will have. But to me, I'm now like, oh, you're trying to deceive humans into thinking that it is a certain thing, yet behind the scenes going, oh no, actually there's these conflicts of interest that we have to report here. But we really tried hard to find people with an absence of conflicts of interest. It's just like, you didn't try hard at all. What does that say about all the other elements of the guidelines in these reports if you can't get that right? Because it's not that difficult to find people with a lack of a conflict of interest.
And in their list of subject matter experts, where they list all the disclosures, there's one person that doesn't have any. There's literally one person.
Good job to that one person.
Shout out to Daisy Zamora for not having any interests to disclose.
I can just imagine that one person, Daisy, just in a room with these folks talking about these guidelines, trying to like offer, and I don't know Daisy, so I can't obviously speak for them, put words in their mouths, but I can just imagine one person without conflicts of interest in a room full of people with clear conflicts of interest trying to have a reasonable conversation about dietary guidelines and having it continually go down the path of things that are related to their conflicts of interest. I would be enraged every day.
And some conflicts just exist in terms of someone's area of work or area of expertise, which happens. But it's questionable that, yeah, one person doesn't have conflicts, and all the conflicts are either in the meat or dairy industry, which, if you're trying to do like a broad base of subject matter experts, whether they be researchers, industry people, it should be more than two industries. That in itself is also raises red flags here.
anybody on there that disclose, say, interests of like the American Pulse Growers Association or soybean farmers or anything like that. It's just dairy and cattle. Very, very interesting.
Which also raises questions about the political aspects in that there are some like plant-based proteins that are big aspects of agriculture in some US states. Things like soybeans, like Mike just mentioned. Why were none of them consulted, even though it is both a big aspect of how we've moved some public health recommendations for food, and it's also a part of the US economy in some states. Again, that seems like it's for potentially political reasons there or ideological reasons.
It's just so weird. I don't even know if I understand what the idea is behind kind of like focusing on animal based proteins so much. Like that's part of the narrative. I get it. But yeah, maybe it's good to clarify that a lot of the evidence out now is that plant based proteins are very beneficial and perhaps more beneficial to include than animal based proteins. They got a lot going for them, like fiber along with the protein, and they can help with preventing chronic disease. That's what we mainly find with many chronic disease. Um, so it's just I don't even understand why there's all of a sudden kind of demonizing these foods or shoving them out when like who cares? What do we have against beans? I love beans.
In the larger report, there is a table where they show the advisory committee's recommendations and which ones were accepted and rejected. And we'll show this in the video version of this, but it shows that a lot of the things relating to things like legumes or plant proteins or emphasizing certain foods that were strongly recommended by the advisory committee were either rejected fully or partially, and this again simply just goes against evidence on some of these things in particular, or goes against evidence on research on what is either more protective or may contribute more to chronic disease. So that also is a question there. And we could go into some of those recommendations later on as well, Bram.
Yeah, there was what, like 30 some recommendations provided by the advisory committee, which were rejected wholly, like not partially, wholly. Most of them, actually, if you look at the numbers, how many were here? Above 50% of their recommendations were not implemented in these guidelines, which is, I can't even find the right word for that. And you can go through some of the recommendations and go, okay, I can see maybe where some of them could come from. You can't implement every single recommendation, I would imagine. I have never been a part of creating guidelines, but like when you're rejecting massive components of recommendations, like the plant proteins is one example we've already talked about, without really a strong evidence base for such a rejection, it provides me with an idea that, okay, why would they do that? Why would they just clearly reject research in a lot of those areas? Not to mention, and it's we just to be clear, we don't have any conflicts of interest in this either. We don't get checks from Big Beans to say, hey, yeah. Why weren't they in the guidelines? But there's a lot of things going for that food group, and especially when we're in an economy like we're in right now, where food cost is very high for a lot of folks in terms of the percentage of their income that they spend on food. Grocery prices are not necessarily going down. Why would we just shut out, or just push down a little bit a category of food that is very economical, which is really, really silly to me and kind of tone deaf.
That's a really good point, Brandon. Yeah, the new food pyramid recommends almost doubling protein intake, and a lot of that's encouraged to come from animal sources. And I don't know if you've been to a grocery store lately, but animal proteins have like gone up significantly. And when you're telling people that they need to eat more protein, and that's gonna, have a large impact on their grocery bill, that's gonna make it harder for people to follow these guidelines. So, which kind of goes back to, I think it was Matthew you were saying earlier, just because these guidelines come out doesn't necessarily mean people are going to be following them, especially not overnight. Um, and they also don't recommend, like you said, plant-based sources. They're very economical. There's been some increases in pricing for plant-based sources, lentils, chickpeas, stuff like that, but still much more economical and cost-effective if you're looking to increase total protein intake over animal sources for sure.
And it's not even a one or the other kind of thing. Just because you sometimes eat like soy or chickpeas or lentils doesn't mean you can't eat meat at all. One doesn't fully replace the other. You can have a mix, and that is shown to have health benefits. And if we look at some of the dietary guidelines from the advisory committee that were fully rejected, a lot of the repeated fully rejected ones have to do with plant proteins or things like that. It's just a weird pattern. And others on reducing the intake of red and processed meats are again fully rejected, which has strong evidence for not being great for our health. Other examples include things like low fat or non fat dairy for adults, which again, there's no scientific basis to be suggesting the opposite as they're doing right now. And again, this is from the advisory committee for this report, which in the past has been followed, and these things tend to match, but in this instance, they don't. So it's choosing to ignore research on that particular topic. Again, going with that kind of anti-establishment kind of thing where the researchers are telling you these things, but here's what you actually need to do.
I can't imagine being people that have worked really hard putting together these recommendations, thinking that they were going to have a huge impact on the way that Americans eat and the environment in which they shop for and consume food, and then just to have most of them rejected. I can't imagine how disheartening that must feel to go, well, I guess you just don't care about the science behind all this. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, people that have dedicated like decades of their life to this stuff. It's not just like they yeah, like for us, there is like long education there, but they went on to do further education, like get PhDs in something they're very passionate about, go on to try to influence government and public policy in that particular thing that they're passionate about, doing their job, and then it just feels potentially feels pointless at the end of the day with this report.
Yeah, there's no nuance to these new guidelines. It's very like this is fact and this is what we're changing and this is what you should do unless you want to be part of all of the sick, awful people in America kind of thing, where in reality, science and evidence based is very nuanced. That's part of the difficulties, I think, with coming up with guidelines for the community. But that's where I think this, like, if we can provide any constructive criticism, like, kind of went wrong. Like, they are kind of tailoring these recommendations to a potentially very specific subset of people, and they kind of disregarded um, yeah, how this can impact a wide range of people, like socioeconomic status. Maybe, yeah, we don't have the finances to go out and buy a true loaf of sourdough, whatever that means. Because yeah, those can be like quadruple the cost of just like a regular loaf at the grocery store. Um, so yeah, it just kind of ignores a lot of that information out there. And yeah, in that report too, Matthew, that you kind of like went over, like they deliberately, that's one of the, I think, recommendations that they dismissed, right? Is to kind of, or they commented on it to not really take into account any of those demographic pieces, because that's woke or whatever we're looking at here.
Yeah, above the chart where they talk about which recommendations were fully, partially, or not at all implemented, they have this, I guess, preamble where they justify it, saying that the report, in their view, was too much looking through a health equity lens and obligating reviewers to filter evidence through considerations of race, ethnicity, culture, and socioeconomic status. They also specifically mentioned the previous administration, which is a weird thing to do in a public health document. The Biden administration described health equity as the central lens for the DGAC's work, and talked about how much the term was used. So they are saying that they find that acknowledging those things strays away from unbiased scientific assessment and that it should not inform public policy. When we're thinking about public policy that involves the public, we should consider who is in the public, and different countries, different regions have different populations. This isn't just race and ethnicity as they mentioned, but it's a lot of other factors for what's our starting place for what the health behaviors are in this community, what are the foods that are common, that kind of thing. And those things should be considered when you're making a broad based population level tool. They are general broad public health guidelines, and things like that will be taken into account there. You should also note that some of the things that they rejected not only are good for socioeconomic reasons, like Mike said, where they can lower food costs, but also are in line with what the science in itself, attached, not attached to any of those considerations. What the science itself says is also resulting in positive health outcomes, like some of those plant proteins. So it can be both without those things being connected. It can individually be something that is shown to have health benefits, regardless of someone's race, ethnicity, or culture. But it can also, at the same time, kind of address that some communities maybe eat more meat, some maybe eat more plant proteins. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's kind of a false dichotomy that is then used to reject things that are scientifically backed and also just make more sense at a broad population level.
But what do I do if I'm a human and I can't afford a lot of the foods that are being recommended? I guess I just am not a good human.
That's what the guidelines say.
I think that's probably where the personal responsibility part comes in their tagline for the new food pyramid. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it kind of reinforces the view that healthy eating or positive lifestyle habits need to be expensive by putting pictures of expensive red meat at the very top of it, and whole milk and and butter and all that type of stuff, where people are noticing the cost of those things going up the most, while de-emphasizing some of the things at the bottom that are, yeah, lower cost but can still be part of a healthy diet, or in some instances are healthier.
Yeah, fun little experiment. Actually, that's a hilarious point. So yeah, if any of you know different cuts of meat, you'll know, and if you don't know, you will now know that the steak that's on the food pyramid, the new pyramid, is a prime rib steak, or at least in Canada, it's called a prime rib steak. And I encourage you to walk through a meat department at any grocery store, look at the prices of the steaks, and pick that one up and see how expensive it is. It is one of the most expensive steaks you can purchase, which is comical, and I didn't think about it in that way until you just described that. But so, kind of, kind of funny, but not funny at all, really, at the same time.
But it's real food, Brandon. So you have to. Otherwise, you're a bad, unhealthy person and you're contributing to America being sick.
Yeah, because everybody is choosing to not eat healthy intentionally just to make everybody's lives more difficult.
And Laura, you had a point on how some of the recommendations for, yeah, like the meat and the prime rib at the top versus things on saturated fat just don't make any sense mathematically. It's kind of hard to follow both at the same time.
Yeah, they recommend still to, yeah, they kind of mishmash two recommendations that compete with each other, I feel like, together. Or they kept the recommendation where we want to keep saturated fat to about 10% of our total calorie intake. Um, the fact is that like a lot of animal based proteins, those are mainly made up of like the fats that are in them are made up of saturated fats. So it's like, I won't say impossible, but it's very easy to go over that 10% of total calories, excuse me, if you're following those recommendations, right? To choose more animal based proteins. Um, yeah, like 10% of a 2000 calorie diet would be about 22 grams of saturated fat. So if you're going for like, I don't know, what I can imagine would be a typical intake, like you're having maybe like some eggs at breakfast, a cup of whole milk, you're cooking with some butter at each meal, a cut of meat, some cheese at lunch, and then another cut of meat at dinner. then you're going to be well over that 22 grams of saturated fat. And yeah, we want you to get enough protein, right? Because we're ending the war on protein. So you need to include those animal based proteins. It's just really hard not to go over there, right? So, not impossible. Um, yeah, the steak is a great example of that. Like one cut of steak that you wouldn't think is like entirely egregious as far as steak goes is going to be about like half of that saturated fat intake by itself. So, yeah, it's just, it's not really adding up and it makes it more complicated for Americans, I feel.
Yeah, 3 ounces of a roasted prime rib steak with 1/8 of an inch fat remaining has 9 grams of saturated fat. So that one of the items alone on the pyramid at the top of the pyramid gives you puts you over the recommendations or near the top by itself in the amounts that people actually eat it.
Who's eating a 3 ounce steak? Yeah.
Yeah, because that steak on the top of the pyramid ain't no 3 ounce. That's for sure. That's gonna be like a 7 or 8 ounce in how thick it looks. That's for sure. Yeah. hmm Math is hard, man. It's difficult. I feel some people just can't do it, and these calculators that you have nowadays just can't do it.
I was just doing a quick look through one of our Canadian food stores, Save on Foods, and I'm looking at steaks here, and it's like 366-gram steak, you know, a 500-gram top sirloin, and I mean, and some of these people, sure, you can cut them up and share them, but again, I know when I eat steak, I'm not typically cutting it up and having a 3 ounce portion, and you certainly can't buy a 3 ounce steak, in the grocery store. It's just not how they're packaged. So definitely something else that people would need to be more mindful of.
I was just going to say, like, thinking of even if you can try and find the moderation within that recommendation and say, okay, maybe we're trying to be a little bit more economical, include more like animal based proteins, get some steak in there. Maybe we're like buying in bulk, or if you have the privilege of being able to kind of like buy a quarter of a cow or something like that and freeze it, then that's also a privilege on its own, right? Like I have about a millimeter of freezer space right now, and I'm not going to go and buy like a whole other stand up freezer. I don't have room for that. And so, yeah, it's really, really hard to make something like that economical. Um, and goes to serve, like there's a lot of other considerations to make other than just buying the food and eating it. We need to think about, yeah, what does that actually look like in your lifestyle? I think that's why a lot of these recommendations aren't really ever followed in general anyways.
Is there anything that we haven't covered?
Alcohol, the lack thereof of discussion in this food pyramid.
Oh, okay. You noted no alcohol in the current guidelines. Tell us more, Mike.
New Canadian recommendations have kind of come out and recommended that they've shifted from a safe consumption to acknowledging that there's really no safe consumption of alcohol, and instead set it up as a continuum of risk. So 0 drinks per week has multiple benefits. Better health, better sleep, better mood, at least for some. And then, but when you get into like say 2 drinks or less per week, you said this is the new target to likely avoid any alcohol related consequences for yourself or others. And so, but even that's saying it's not there's no risk, it's low risk. And then going up from there, we'd say 3 to 6 drinks per week. You have risk of developing several types of cancers like breast or colon cancer increases at this level, and that will be a moderate risk. And then 7 drinks or more per week, your risk of heart disease or stroke increases significantly at this level, and they call that increasingly high risk. So they don't mention alcohol at all in this new food pyramid. So they don't say moderate consumption, they don't say no consumption, they don't say high consumption. They just totally didn't mention it. Whereas before there was some guidance on saying reducing alcohol intake, but that's not even mentioned here whatsoever. So an interesting omission right now from that food pyramid. One plus is that their hydration benefits, they do recommend water or unsweetened beverages as your choice of fluid. So that's really good to see, but disappointing to see that there's no talk at all about alcohol intake.
They do. They do mention on I think it was page 5. They give one little teeny piece. I'm not going to contradict your statement because what they said, what would they talk about alcohol is so minuscule that it might as well be nothing. Consume less alcohol for better overall health. That's basically nothing. And interestingly enough, there is, going back to the piece that we talked about earlier around the table of recommendations that the advisory committee provided them to look at and consider. One of such recommendations was consider the findings of 2 other expert committees that are addressing alcoholic beverages and health outcomes, which I would imagine relate to what you just said, Mike, and the newer messaging that is out around alcohol intake and there being no safe limit of alcohol consumption. They rejected that recommendation to consider those findings. It's not a partial, it was just a straight up no. So why? I don't know.
I think the lore that was added on to that, did you guys hear like Dr. Oz's statements on that recommendation there? Which it's so funny to even mention Dr. Oz.
You mean Secretary Mehmet Oz?
Yeah, I can't believe that is what he is. Um, but yeah, he kind of went to chat on about that statement a little bit, and some people were kind of criticizing that, like, why are we kind of like reverting from some of those more specific guidelines on alcohol and then just kind of like dismissing it a little bit. He came out to say that alcohol is a social lubricant, so it can be really beneficial for your health because it helps you be social. And I think it's good to mention that if you require alcohol to have social interaction, then I don't think that is a good health activity for you, and you might need to chat with somebody about that. Um, so yeah, I don't know where that kind of recommendation came from, but that's kind of the narrative that's out there nowadays. Is yeah, it's good for making yourself be social.
I mean, I get it. Socializing is a huge component of health, but not like that. See, I find it. This is where the consistency. There's a severe lack of consistency with the framing of the guidelines, because on the one hand, they're stating that these guidelines are the epitome of health. We want to remove anything related to anything social, any socioeconomic components, anything that talks about equity. We want to just talk about what is the best recommendations that people should follow to achieve the best health. Paraphrasing, of course. Yet, let's not acknowledge alcohol in any level of significance, because that, like, you're going to choose a path, just own it and walk down the path of just being like, hey, this is all the best stuff, cool. Just own it instead of just pick this and pick that and try and frame it as this is the best when it's not.
Yeah, Oz later doubled down and then said that the previous recommendations on restricting alcohol did not have strong, specific scientific evidence to for their basis. So that's good.
I mean, just because you didn't read it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Boom, roasted.
I don't understand how such a statement can even be said. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any others now? Like we could continue on for hours just picking things out. I feel like we covered most of the goodies. Oh yes, about the good things. What are some positive aspects of the new recommendations? We talked a lot about not good things and contradictions and issues that we have with it. But what are some aspects that are positive aside from stuff that we've already mentioned? I suppose we can also highlight, reinforce some of the positive aspects that we've talked about.
One of the things that I'd like to point out and give them a kudos for is that vegetables are good. That's, has some top shelf space in their new pyramid, right up there with the animal protein sources. Vegetables and fruits are good. And people have been saying that for a long time. And unless you really, really dig into the nutrition weeds and the conspiracy theories, I think it's hard to find people that would disagree and claim that fruits and vegetables are bad. But there's still some of those people out there, but we're not worried about them today. This food pyramid says vegetables and fruits are good.
There was one person on one of our videos talking about how fiber isn't necessary for human health, but we won't go down that path. I agree. I like it.
I need to talk to them.
Yeah, send Laura after. I agree. I agree. They got that there for sure, and you got to give them props for it. Got to credit is due.
It is groundbreaking. No one they were saying what no one else was willing to say, in that vegetables and fruits are good and people should eat them. So kudos to them for that.
Any other positive aspects of the new guidelines aside from vegetables are good?
I love that they mention whole grains. They kind of go into it a little bit deeper. That makes it more ambiguous, but it's on the upside down pyramid to have whole grains. So that's exciting. Some good fiber.
Yeah, so they did one good thing, but to, I guess, summarize the criticisms, we could do that piece next. I think the main issues are that it does not match scientific evidence for nutrition recommendations in terms of things like uh, plant proteins as a source of proteins for reducing amounts of saturated fat we get in a day. Also, the benefits there in increasing fiber, of which the American gets an average of 14 grams of a day, seems kind of relevant to include things like that. It is not economical. The recommendations there are not just not good for health, but also not good for nutritional health, but also for how much it costs and the impact that that has on people's lives, and adding additional worry that to be healthy, you need to do it in a very expensive way.
I guess the other aspect that we chatted about was, yeah, like it's hard to even meet some of the recommendations without contradicting some of the others, like the saturated fat intake, alongside eating more animal based proteins. So that's a tricky one. And yeah, just kind of dismissing a little bit of the nuance so that they can take a harder stance on some things.
Usually, when you put out stuff like this, you try and make it work together and be cohesive and have harmony, and you're not having one part of it just be at odds with the other. There was a significant lack of that present in the guidelines, which I predict is just going to confuse a ton of people. It's going to confuse people that don't have any interest in trying to pander to certain groups of people, and then you're going to have groups of people that latch onto one arm of the contradiction and run with that, and it's just going to be a mess, I imagine.
Another key thing is that an upside down pyramid does not make for a useful, intuitive public health tool to use in your daily life, because we eat out of plates and bowls for the most part, and cups, not whatever this is. Would it be funnels, cones?
Mike, you were joking earlier about eating off of a slice of pizza. I think that's about the closest thing that we could ever come up with as to what could be triangular.
That was not a joke, sir. I fully advocate eating slices of pizza and maybe even putting things on top of it to eat off of them. Absolutely. That's not a joke.
I've never used a piece of pizza as a plate. I'm going to try that. And then you can just eat the plate after. That's bonus. See, look at that. I love it. Don't have dishes.
Yeah, overall, with this new tool, the positive aspects aren't new at all. And then the things that are new are not evidence based and do not support health as far as we know, for the most part. It also does not work well as a tool to guide policy for things like, again, school food programming and that type of stuff that this stuff influences. So overall, just doesn't do the job of what this is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's for sure. Well, there you have it, folks. Here's our thoughts. We could spend a couple more hours probably picking this thing apart, but hopefully, I feel like we covered the biggest parts of this. So, why don't we take this opportunity to close the episode? If you have been watching this far and made it this far, thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't seen any of our other episodes, I encourage you heavily to check out our other videos. We've talked about some topics actually that have popped up in the new guidelines. We did an episode on seed oils that we talked about, which there's some controversy for, that has been in a part of a lot of the conversation around the new guidelines about seed oils, which is fun. So check that one out. And we'll say see you later for now. Enjoy the day wherever you are from the team here at Revive. Thanks, guys, for joining. This was a lot of fun talking about new guidelines.
Thanks for having us. And quick shout out if you want any help, investigating the new guidelines further. Lots of dietitians here at the office are ready to work with you if you need help.
Yes. Very nice. All right, guys. Take care. See you soon.